October 1943. A remote, snow-dusted village nestled in the forests of Nazi-occupied Belarus. The German war machine has stripped it bare. Every rifle, every ounce of usable metal, confiscated. The local partisans are desperate, facing the enemy with little more than axes and hunting knives. Their cause seems hopeless. Pause, but in the heart of this village a single stubborn flame still burns. This is the story of what happens when a people's will to survive meets the skill of one man's hands. When a village had no guns, this blacksmith forged an army from scrap. He is not a soldier by trade, but a craftsman. His world before the war was one of horseshoes, plowshares, and wagon wheels. His tools are simple: a heavy anvil, a hand-cranked forge, a hammer, and a pair of calloused hands hardened by decades of work. The village itself sits in a region under the brutal control of the 286th Security Division, a unit tasked with enacting the Sicherheitsdiensts, ruthless anti-partisan policies. Known as Bandenbekämpfung, these operations aim to crush resistance through sheer terror, burning villages, executing civilians, and deporting thousands. The local partisan detachment, a group of roughly 30 men and women from the surrounding area, was part of the wider Soviet-led Belarusian resistance. They were survivors of massacres, escaped POWs, and ordinary citizens who could no longer stand by. Their commander was a former Red Army lieutenant named Victor, who had been cut off during the retreat in 41. By the autumn of 43, their situation was dire. A planned operation to disrupt German rail lines was imminent, but they possessed only 7 functional Mosin Nagant rifles between them, with fewer than a dozen rounds per weapon. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and facing annihilation if they tried to fight. Victor knew they needed more than courage. They needed firepower, and so he turned to the one man in the village who could create something from nothing: the blacksmith Ivan. The meeting was held in Ivan's smithy after dark, the only light coming from the banked coals of his forge. Victor laid out the problem. "We need rifles, Ivan, at least 20. And we need grenades. Can you do it?" Ivan looked at his tools, then at the determined, desperate faces around him. He knew the penalty for aiding partisans was death, not just for him, but for his entire family, for the whole village. The German Feldgendarmerie had posted notices warning exactly that. But he also knew the stories of neighboring villages that had been wiped off the map. He made his decision. "I cannot make a modern rifle," he stated plainly, "but I can make a weapon that fires." His plan was audacious. He would create single-shot, muzzle-loading rifles based on a 19th century design, robust and simple enough to be manufactured with his limited tools. The real challenge was ammunition. The operation began in secret. Villagers at immense personal risk became scavengers. They collected every piece of scrap metal they could find: broken agricultural machinery, old stovepipes, discarded brass bed frames, and even spent artillery shell casings the Germans had left in the fields. A young boy was tasked with secretly gathering charcoal from the forest for the forge. By night, the clang of Ivan's hammer took on a new rhythmic purpose. He first crafted the barrels from the most durable steel tubing he could salvage, painstakingly reaming them by hand. Stocks were carved from dense oak. The firing mechanisms, the most complex part, were fashioned from hardened carriage springs and filed to precision. Each weapon was a unique artifact of defiance. Meanwhile, Ivan designed a simple, devastatingly effective grenade. Using empty food tins and pipes, he packed them with black powder itself. A dangerous mixture, painstakingly concocted from stolen ingredients and shrapnel made from chopped up nails, bearings, and scrap iron. The fuses were made from waterproofed cloth and slow-burning cord. By the end of the first month, hidden in a pit beneath the smithy's dirt floor, were 12 finished rifles and nearly 40 of these improvised grenades. Then disaster struck. On a cold November morning, a German patrol, acting on a vague tip from an informant, rolled into the village. 2 Kubelwagens and a truck full of soldiers from the 286th Security Division. They began a house-to-house search. The tension was electric, paralyzing. Ivan was at his anvil, working on a horseshoe, trying to appear normal as the jackboots approached his workshop. He could hear the soldiers shouting, overturning furniture in nearby homes. His eyes flicked to the loose floorboards near the forge, beneath which lay the entire arsenal of the resistance. Pause one wrong glance, one nervous gesture, and it would all be over. The weapons would be discovered, and a reprisal of unimaginable horror would descend upon the village. The entire desperate gamble hung by a thread in that moment, under the gaze of the enemy. That very night, Victor and his partisans retrieved the weapons. The operation was a go. Their target, a key railway bridge used to supply the German front line near Vitebsk. Under the cover of a moonless night and a howling snowstorm, the 30 partisans took up positions. 15 of them were now armed with Ivan's makeshift rifles. The rest carried axes, a few pistols, and the satchels of grenades. Pause. As a German supply train, guarded by a platoon of infantry on flat cars, chugged slowly onto the bridge, Victor gave the signal. It was not a coordinated volley of automatic fire, but the sporadic, thunderous boom of black powder weapons, each shot followed by a cloud of white smoke. The Germans, caught completely by surprise in the blinding snow, initially thought they were under artillery attack. In the chaos, the partisans unleashed Ivan's grenades, rolled down the embankment or lobbed in high arcs. They detonated with terrifying, jagged violence. The shrapnel, nails, bearings, scrap, was brutally effective at close range. The German guards were thrown into disarray. Using the panic, a partisan team dashed forward and placed demolition charges on the bridge supports. Charges they did have and blew a 30-foot gap in the structure. The mission, built on scrap metal weapons, was a staggering success. The bridge was rendered unusable for 3 critical weeks, disrupting the flow of men and materiel to the front. The partisans scattered back into the forest without a single loss, vanishing like ghosts. The German high command was furious, baffled by reports of unusually large explosions and heavy, non-standard small arms fire. They never linked the attack to the quiet village. Smithy even continued his work, producing another batch of weapons before. The area was liberated by the Soviet advance in the summer of 1944, while exact numbers are lost. Post-war testimonies from partisans credited Ivan's workshop with producing at least 25 functional rifles and over 100 improvised grenades. These weapons directly equipped a partisan platoon, enabling them to conduct multiple successful ambushes and survive numerous anti-partisan sweeps. For his actions, Ivan was later awarded the Medal for Partisan Valor, First Class, though he rarely spoke of the war, returning to the quiet life of a village blacksmith. His legacy was not in a famous battle, but in the silent, defiant act of creation that turned the very debris of occupation into the tools of liberation.